I've been leaving a bunch of things unresponded to in my Discord channel, and I should probably have clarified at some point that the idea behind that was for me to actually turn these into an episode. Speaking of which, why did I not turn that off? Please, phone, I need you to stop. There we go. Unprofessionalism. I have it. So, that all said, let us start up and... Oh boy, that's a long one. Alright, so the first one that I want to get into is from a user called Token Ghost. And they say, how do I deal with the thing my town does every year around this time where the church plants a bunch of white crosses in front of the road saying 3,000 babies die due to abortion every year on it? I know I can't stop them, so I was thinking of maybe debating them. How would I even do that? So the best thing you can do in situations like that, personally, is realizing that what they're doing is essentially a form of protest. They are using their property... At least I'm assuming their property, either their property or public property, to protest. And they are using the 3,000 crosses thing in order to actually do that protest. The best thing you can do in any situation like that is counter-protesting. If it is something that they're doing on their own private property, unfortunately, there's nothing you can really do about that unless there's like a homeowners association somewhere that can help you. But that said, the best thing you can do is try to organize some sort of counter-protest. So see if there is some land that is nearby, where it's visible as well, where you can put up something on the opposite end. I mean, if they want to use an emotional response, then have some type of emotional response against them as well. If that's something that you think you can do, that's probably the best move going forward with that. At least that would be my thought. Could be wrong. But, again, that's what I would think would be the best way to deal with that going forward. So, the next question... The next question that we have to take care of on there is from Black Raven. Do you play Magic the Gathering? And the answer to that is, I have a deck that's a commander deck I do not usually play. However... the biggest problem I have is that I don't have the funding to play Magic. If I look at the games that I do play, I have Pokemon, which I've really only like mildly modified a starter deck for. I have Yu-Gi-Oh! Goat format, which is a format that hasn't changed since 2006. And then I have Weiss, where things don't really cycle out all that often either. So card games that once I've put in the investment, I don't actually have to continue paying into them, because I can't justify paying into them. If I could justify paying into them, then I would do so. But unfortunately, I can't. So, that said. The next question on there is from Marissa, and they say, I have found a segment of communists called Positists, who are literally Dangers of Wu incarnate. Water births, dolphin communication, nuclear war is good, etc. Not to mention UFOs. Have you heard of Positists? The answer to that is no. I have not. That is news to me. That sounds like something that I should actually do a response on, because anybody who is on the left and is sufficiently ill-informed is the best way to say it. I don't want to just say stupid. To think that nuclear war is a good thing and buy into UFOs and stuff, I would honestly have to deal with, because they're making me look bad. And they're actively making me look bad at that point. The next one we have is from a user named Owner of All Owos, and it is, do you agree with the idea that we should respect people and not beliefs, even though respecting other beliefs is considered the social norm? So I am of the opinion that we need to respect people and not beliefs. I don't think beliefs are something that need to be respected. Beliefs are something that need to be challenged if they are truly wrong. I need to also adjust these headphones. However, you do have to do it with some tact, because people's beliefs are so sufficiently attached to their identities, to their personalities, that when you are attacking their beliefs, there are a lot of people that won't see it as doing much different than attacking them specifically. And you want to avoid that, because if you're doing a direct attack on the person, it's very likely that they won't actually respond very well to it. Because if you were to talk to me and say, oh, you're just a stupid fucking liberal, you may be attempting to communicate something about my beliefs. Now, granted, I'm not a liberal, but again, you are trying to communicate to me that there's at least some problem with my beliefs, with their framework, with their foundation. But if you are going to do that in that way, because you've gone at it in that way, you're not really going after my beliefs at that point. You're kind of making an attack at my person. Also, Ken Valentine says, how are you and the partners? I'm doing well. And DJ Malcontent says, don't see away from their term stupid for people who think nuclear war is good. Yeah, I agree. I don't want to use the term stupid for the reason that, like in the belief issue that I was talking about just now, when I call something like that stupid, that's a very pointed term, and it causes the conversation to be very blunt, directed, and almost accusatory and attacking. And even if that's what I'm meaning to do and meaning to say, it may end up being that I'm incredibly counterproductive when I do that. I'm unable to actually, in any meaningful way, convince this person otherwise, that their belief is unfounded, or that it's ultimately a net negative. So, I don't know. You have to be very, very careful when you're dealing with that. Is this okay? It is just water. Making certain that it is. Although I will say this, I have noticed that a lot of people who say respect the beliefs, or respect the person but not the beliefs, I have noticed that a lot of people who use that end up using that as an excuse to be an asshole. I'm not saying everybody that follows that ethos does that, but it does seem to be pretty normal to me. Or it does seem to be the norm to me whenever somebody tells me they respect somebody as a person but not their beliefs. Or at least they use that. They almost always use that afterwards as like an ad hoc apologetic for why they're being a dick. So, for instance, if you are talking to a pagan, for instance, or even a Christian, and you tell them that, oh, your belief in God is stupid, your belief is irrational, and they say, why are you insulting me? And they go, no, I'm insulting your belief. There's a difference. Well, if that belief is so tied into their identity, which in the case of religion, many times it is, there really doesn't seem much of a difference. To the person, there's really not much of a difference. So you have to be very, very careful how you handle that, using something more akin to, say, the Socratic method. Hey, why do you hold this position? Maybe you should reevaluate why you hold position A, as opposed to saying position A is stupid and dumb. Because saying position A is stupid and dumb isn't much different than saying you're stupid and dumb for believing position A. Especially in standard discourse. It's really not much different. Puffalupkus in the chat says, I had somebody give me the blanket statement that polyamory is paying the rent while somebody else has sex with your partner. And when I asked them, what about a guy in a relationship with 3 females, they said that's impossible. I know they are aware you exist, though. Wait, they're gonna say that a guy in a relationship with 3 girls is impossible, yet they're aware of me. They're aware that I exist, and that's literally the relationship that I have. Is that's weird. That's really weird. Also, how's it going, Jack and Quill? Yeah, no, that's that's strange to say the least. I know I just mentioned a few seconds ago that Oh! Oh! I know who you're talking about now. I know exactly who you're talking about. That's not surprising. That's not surprising. Just to say that the relationship okay, no. I have heard, or me and the person you're referring to have a lot of disagreements. I have heard many things come out of their mouth that sound incredibly unfounded, and the conviction that they have with their beliefs has always astounded me, especially when it is with those very unfounded things. And if you know you are the person I'm talking about, and you disagree with that statement, we can have that conversation. I am more than willing to have you on my show. Specifically talking about polyamory, I am perfectly fine having that conversation with you. Because you and I have never actually been at each other's throats. We've just been in situations where we disagree with each other in live streams. So, I'm okay with that. All right. Continuing on after that. Hrothgar, she says, do you have a link to some sources I can introduce the 5 categories we identify sex to somebody with? I'm remembering gamete, gonad, phenotype, and I can't remember the other 2. I know you've gone over them in streams before. So honestly, you can just look at Wikipedia for that. Wikipedia will show you that there's the primary things that we look at and the secondary things that we look at when determining sex. And if you lump a lot of the things in the secondary area into phenotype, then you end up with 5 different characteristics that we have. So, yeah, no, Wikipedia is helpful. And it does look like actually in the Discord, Zero Dime did respond with the Wikipedia article on sex and gender distinction to give them a start there. So, that's a good thing. Mythical Sty Satan says, I know you aren't a lawyer and you might not understand much about the law, but I got to thinking, isn't it unethical to label abortion as optional if it endangers the woman's life? If so, wouldn't the woman be labeled as such have the grounds to sue for her right to ethical treatment and statistical accuracy? So, unfortunately, when we're dealing with issues of law, a lot of times what we see is that pedantry is almost always at play in some form or fashion. For instance, in the situations that I know of, where Emmett and Aaron both have had to have abortions, and Aliakai, my friend, has also had to have an abortion, and for all of them, it's been labeled as optional is not the word that they use for it. The word that they use for it is elective. So when they introduce that as elective, it's the person electing to make a decision because they had the option to give birth, even though the chance of the birth killing them was astronomically high. I don't think you can make a case that it's unlawful to call it elective, and I don't know what you would be able to do going forward because you would still be dealing with the fact that we have this 98% elective number. Personally, I don't agree with it being called elective because the only thing that I've ever heard that number used for is from somebody who's taking the pro-life position and is being incredibly disingenuous with that number or simply doesn't know and is trying to use the number as a bludgeoning device. I wish that I lived in a world where we can change that, but I don't know if we really can change that because of the way that the current terminology is set up. Again, it's really pedantic. But again, a lot of things in law end up being pedantic. Gainer Flash does ask, who or what introduced you to modern paganism / polytheism, and how did you become an ally for them? So back when I was still a young Earth creationist, I actually was playing World of Warcraft back when I was like 13 years old, and I was part of 2 guilds. One of them was called... what was it? Righteous Defenders or something like that. Council of Elders, that's what it was. I was in a guild on Khadgar called Council of Elders. It still exists today, actually. But I don't go on Khadgar anymore, so I have no idea in what capacity it exists. I just know that when I looked on the WoW Armory, I found it. There was another smaller guild, though, that my Warlock was a part of. I never got my Warlock to max level. But I became friends with the guild leader, whose name It wasn't Tari. I can't remember what their name in the actual game was. But this person's name was Crystal, and they became a very good friend of mine. At some point, we got on the conversation of polytheism. Now, remember, I was 13 years old, and this person was an adult with a full-time job and everything. This was the person I respected. So this was my first introduction to somebody who held a polytheistic belief. I didn't want to get rid of my friendship with them just because they had a different belief than me, so we had conversations about it. And as a result of us having multiple conversations about it, it became something that just was normalized for me. And when I moved into high school, there was another friend of mine who I met in the 9th grade, Megan. And if memory serves, I don't remember what her religion was at the time, but I know that her boyfriend, Cody, who was one of my best friends after that point, was also polytheist. He was pagan. I believe he was Wiccan specifically, but don't quote me on that. And because I had already been friends with Crystal for years at this point, we started having conversations about his religion as well, and it ended up lining up, not perfectly, because they did have different sects of that religion, but it didn't seem entirely irrational, as Cody was a very rational person who held that. So all through my time growing up, while I was still a young Earth creationist Christian, I was introduced at a very young age to rational people who were friendly, who were my friends and colleagues, who held these beliefs. And because they held these beliefs, and they weren't unreasonable, and they weren't the painted picture that we had in school, because I went to a Christian private school first, and the painted picture we got for people who practiced witchcraft was largely negative. But then when I actually met these people, they were just as normal as you, I, or anybody else. And that led me to realize that, maybe when my school paints people as horrible people because they're not young Earth creationists just like me, then maybe that doesn't really mean much. Maybe the fact that my school paints them as something doesn't mean anything significant. Because obviously they're wrong about that. Turns out later I found out they were wrong about a whole lot more than that. But, Eli Bubbles in Discord says, Suris, you might have answered this before, or if you don't want to go deeply into it, and if so, sorry, but where on the lefty spectrum would you identify with most? By this I mean positions like DemSoc, SocDem, anarcho-syndicalism, and etc. You've referenced BreadTomb and had clips of people like Thought Slime, and I've been wondering if Antifa Catgirl Suris fan art is necessary. So don't do Antifa Catgirl Suris fan art for only one reason. Antifa's really, really, really bad for optics. And one of my things is I want to be able to convince people who are not on the left that, hey, maybe people on the left are fairly rational. But if I am to use Antifa paraphernalia, that will create a largely insular community where I'm not able to talk to people who are on the right side of things, who are on the conservative spectrum. It becomes impossible for me to do that if I am so thoroughly associated with paraphernalia that they have demonized. For the same reason why if you are somebody on the left and you see somebody with a MAGA hat, that's usually, I know it's the genetic fallacy, but that's usually credence to discount them in some way, shape, or form. So, I can't control what an artist does or doesn't do, but I also know that it won't be integrated as in the same way that Rule 63 Necosaurus did. However, where on the lefty spectrum do I identify with most? Democratic socialist is probably the best way you could describe me. I know that democracy is I know that democracy is the worst of all political systems that has ever been created, except for all of the other ones we've tried. So keeping democracy, but having a more socialist framework where CEOs that have $108 billion aren't a thing, and those taxes can actually be used to help other people, either highly taxing them to the point where they still have enough money to live in luxury, but everybody else can also not die of starvation or not being able to pay for medical expenses, or the more radical position of just get rid of CEOs and let the workers control the means of production, which would literally make you a democratic socialist. You have the means of production being controlled by the workers, and because you do need at least some hierarchy in that setup in order to make sure that things run efficiently. I don't know if you've ever tried having a all chiefs in the kitchen type of it, or all the chefs in the kitchen scenario, but it's chaos. You do want somebody to divvy out responsibilities, and you do want there to be incentive for them to do so. Then definitely having a democratically elected set of leadership and hierarchy that every business can use is something that I think would be worthwhile, because you need that hierarchy in those types of businesses in order for it to function in any way. But there's no reason that you should have the CEO that just exists there doing what Steven Crowder says, the largely cerebral work. You can have a democratically elected person do that just as well. And if the company is flourishing and it's doing well, then elect them for another term. If it's not doing well, then you elect a new one. It's the same way that we work the government. Why wouldn't it work? The government doesn't work unlike a corporate organization anyway. Just make your corporate organizations work like the government's supposed to, in theory. That all said, our next one is Marcus is Cool, 224, and they are asking, what topic do you most hate to talk about? Creationism? I'm sorry. There's probably things that I hate talking about more than creationism, but let's be honest. At this point, the creationism argument has been so thoroughly debunked and just tread on. I don't find much worth in it. And when I don't find much worth in a conversation, I don't like having it. There are people who are not me who can do perfectly fine tackling that. Like if you want that, go look at Bill Ludlow's, rest in peace, but look at Bill Ludlow's older videos. Look at anything that Logic has put out on the topic. I mean, heck, if you're really wanting to dabble in something edgy, go look at the 75-part series from Thunderfoot. Stay away from his anti-feminism stuff. He's not very well-founded on that. Or you can also go into the foundational falsehoods of creationism from Aaron Ra. All of those are just wonderful series that can help you figure that stuff out. I don't think I need to say the same things that they are all saying. Granted, I'm still going to do video responses to creationists because holy shit, the amount of dishonesty that exists in that circle is palpable. But still, it also looks like my thing is lagging a lot, like my head is snapping. Is that happening? Because if that's happening, then I need to figure out something. Something's obviously going wrong. Okay, the next one is from Mythical Sky Satan. I know this one was asked before, but which champion do you play most in League of Legends? Twisted Fate and Lulu are probably the ones that I think I play the most, more than anything. And the next one we have, why is nose itching a thing? Like, I'm on stream, and then my nose keeps itching more than it ever itches outside of that. Like, I have never had my nose itch as much as it does when I'm on stream. Why is that? Is it the same thing as like when you yawn and then everybody around you has to yawn? Is there just some like psychological trigger that causes it to happen? Like, oh, I've turned the stream on. It's time for my nose to itch. That's it. It's got to happen now. Hasn't happened all day, but here we are. Next we have is from Token Van Dweller. What show is it that you are using for clips lately? I'm very interested in watching it. It was the Netflix Castlevania show. Next one we have is from Token Riley. About your geeking during videos, I enjoy it and it helps me understand points better because of how my brain works. Could you try maybe geeking more? I am going to try geeking more in the future. I've done it a little bit when I've done whatchamacallit. I've done it a little bit with the video with Nathaniel Walters that I just did, where in that video they say that you don't randomly have bits in the code. When there's glitches, things go wrong. You don't get new things out of that. I'm like, have you played a Bethesda game? Sometimes it's hard to tell what's a bug and what's a feature in those. The next one we have is from Rose the Fawn. I'm constantly afraid that if I get in an argument where I'd have to defend the gender as a social construct, that I'd lose, because despite the fact that it is a social construct, it's difficult for me to get a good point. Any tips? So the best thing you can do is to read theory on it. I have routinely linked in many of the videos that I've done a bunch of resources on the study that we've done on gender. One of them is a JSTOR article called Doing Gender, which argues from a qualitative standpoint that gender is very much performative, and it has been so across multiple societies. So that would probably help a lot. The other question is, or the other thing you can do when you're actually trying to find decent points to think of in your head, ask somebody what they associate with a female when they're walking down the road. What lets them identify that somebody's a female? And the first thing they're going to go to, usually, is going to be if they have a vagina, right? To which the counter is, how many people have you seen walking outside with their vaginas hanging out? They're going to realize that what they've said is incredibly stupid, and then you can ask the question again, because letting them divert usually doesn't help. So then they're going to say, well, boobs. Okay. And can guys get boobs? Yes, in fact, actually, heavy steroid use can cause that. Just having an overproduction of estrogen can cause that. Or just being overweight can cause that to happen. So that's not a good identifying factor either, because that's something that happens with men all the time as well. So try again, and don't let them leave the point. Don't let them gish gallop away. The next thing they're going to say is probably something like, okay, well, if they're wearing a dress, or if they're wearing female clothes, or if they've got long hair. Okay, cool. And you realize that everything you've just named is, again, something that can be there for guys as well. Guys can wear dresses. Guys can have long hair. In fact, actually, usually somebody who you're having this argument with is going to think that somebody like ContraPoints or Blair White, they're going to argue that they're a guy until they see a picture of them. You can usually show them a picture of them first and go, is this a guy or a girl? And they're going to say, yeah, that's a girl, and go, cool. I'm glad to know that you're as inconsistent as you are ignorant. Don't say that, because you're trying to win somebody over in an argument, and you're just going to make them put up defensive walls when you do that. You know, every single point about what somebody uses to identify a female is either something they can't identify, like chromosomes, like gonads, like genitalia, or something that can be equally argued for men and women as well. So the actual identifying factors that we have, aside from the fact that both men and women can perform them, again, gender's performative, you end up coming down to this point where you go, oh, well, hold on. Literally every identifying factor I can label is a socially constructed one. Women like pink, that's socially constructive. Women should wear dresses, that's socially constructed. Blouses are for women, that's another socially constructed thing. Women have longer hair, that's socially constructed. You start to realize that literally every meaningful identifier you have for gender falls into the social spectrum. So at that point, they can either be really inconsistent and try to make a special pleading case against you, in which case you're now arguing with somebody who's arguing in bad faith. You're not going to convince them at that point. But you may have put the nugget in their head that maybe they're wrong, because they might think back on their points later and realize that some of their points weren't actually that good. The next thing is from Zal the Token Chaotic Neutral, and it is, what do you think of the Blizzard boycott? I personally think that with companies that large, boycotting is ineffective at best, especially since it reminds me of the Nike thing. And I do agree. I don't think that boycotting does terribly much to companies that are sufficiently large. If you have 10% of the United States population, which is millions of people, boycotting Walmart and going somewhere else, Walmart's not really going to feel it. It doesn't affect their bottom line that much. And most of the boycotting done to Blizzard, you unsubscribe. Like, a lot of people are doing unsubscribing from WoW, or just saying, hey, a lot of the boycotters are people who weren't using their products that much anyway, except maybe the odd Hearthstone or Overwatch game, uninstalling their stuff. That boycott isn't really doing anything. Like, the fact that you uninstalled It's not doing much. It's not. And the evidence of this, I know that Blizzard did give a little bit back to Blitzchung, gave him his prize money back, and lowered his sentence down. But if you actually look at what you've done to affect the company, not what you've done to affect their PR team, take a look at the actual forum posts from Blizzard that they have sent to their Chinese audience. Because if you look at the forum posts on the American side, or the EU side, those forum posts say things like, we're sorry, we failed you, we will do better in the future, some form of that. But when you look at the forum posts that they sent to the Chinese audience, those forum posts are almost always explaining their solidarity with the Chinese government and how they would never allow somebody to dishonor them. The exact opposite of what we hear on the American side. The Blizzard boycott didn't do anything. It made their PR team struggle. It made their PR team figure out a way to fix things. It arguably helped Blitzchung specifically, which is good. The one player in the casters that got affected, it did lower their sentences, and you know what? That's all good. But in the grand scheme of things, it didn't do all that much. So that's the reason why when I did my video, I was pointing out, hey, the most constructive thing you can do is attack the actual source of the problem, the conflict between Hong Kong and mainland China. Talk to those governments, and I provided an actual link so that people could send their grievances in to those governments so that they can be heard, so that we can bombard them with that, because I think that's a more effective approach. Now, granted, if you feel like you're morally obligated to boycott Blizzard, go right ahead. I'm not stopping you. It's the same reason why I think that I wouldn't stop somebody from being a vegetarian or a vegan if they really wanted to do that. There's no point in stopping somebody from doing what they think is ethical. If they think that's the ethical thing to do, let them. That's fine. I'm just not going to do it because I don't think that it's the most useful thing. I don't. There's nothing saying you have to do one or the other, but I would be sacrificing more getting rid of my ability to play games that I personally enjoy and also play on stream for you guys, as opposed to getting rid of that stuff and then realizing that, oh, wait a minute, I didn't do anything. I didn't actually do anything to affect Blizzard. Their bottom line's not affected by me as an individual. This is the same problem with the vote with your dollars principle. Voting with your dollars is a wonderful principle on an individualistic level that sounds really good. But in the grand scheme of things, when you try to vote with your dollars, the people who have more dollars get more votes. You as an individual don't have that kind of power. This is the reason why unions were created, because when you are boycotting a company, you need a large and organized effort. That one thing that you can do as an individual doesn't have that much of an impact. You need a collective movement to do something. And there is an argument to be made that because I'm holding that stance, I'm largely not helping in that collective movement. But again, I don't think that these particular types of boycotts, unless they are handled on a collective level, on a massive scale, I don't think they help out that much. I don't. And to the point of it's a lot like the Nike thing and the Keurig thing. It's like that, but not quite the same, because here's the thing. When you have a company that does something like that has a consumable product, a tangible product, when you destroy that, that company knows that if you are going to have a product like that, as good as that, like a Keurig, for instance, you're going to have to buy another one. Now, in your efforts to boycott the company, you've bought 2 Keurigs. Digital products don't work the same way. With digital products, if I uninstall them and then reinstall them, nothing's changed. Now, if somebody deletes their Blizzard account and then has to buy a game like Overwatch again or WoW again and all the different stuff, then yeah, at that point, you've effectively done the same thing as burning the Nike shoes and having to buy them again. But aside from that, it doesn't do this. It's not the same thing categorically unless they're uninstalling their accounts or deleting their accounts completely, which I know there were some people who tried to do. And again, that leads me to the same thing. It's the same thing as the destruction of the items that they have that will largely get bought up again thing that Nike and Keurig were able to capitalize on. Nightshade says, can we uninstall the Nike shoes? I mean, you could try. You could try. Okay, let's see here. The next one we have is from Locke. So I've mentioned before that I've traveled to China, my actual area of study centers on Chinese politics. My girlfriend is mainland Chinese, and we heavily disagree about Hong Kong because her point of view is heavily influenced by the party. What would you suggest? Because I'd like to change her mind, but also not get her in trouble. Additionally, last time we talked about this, she basically got that creationist stare. So, when I see this as Locke, I'm assuming this is real Locke. Changing somebody's opinion on that usually requires you to figure out what the foundation of their beliefs are. You can't engage in a point-by-point debate and then hit them on all the points and then cumulatively knock them down, and then all of a sudden their beliefs are changed magically honky-dory. When you are dealing with something like that, where somebody's beliefs have been so thoroughly influenced, you have to go at it from the foundation. As an example, when I was a young Earth creationist, the first thing that affected my foundation, because I had not been taught that Catholics were evil, I was taught that they were Christians just like me. What first changed my mind, what first allowed me to change my mind, was having a science teacher who believed in evolution, but was also a Christian. That shook my foundation, because my foundation for not believing in evolution was Christianity. As far as I had been taught, Christians couldn't believe in evolution. But here was a Christian, not only a Christian, but a Christian in authority, who was not a young Earth creationist. That shook my foundation. Had that not happened, I probably wouldn't have changed. The thing that unsettled me about the King James Bible, the thing that stopped me from thinking the King James Bible was the be-all, end-all for biblical everything, was having my grandpa, a church-going Christian, simply ask, simply say, tell you what, in 10 years, let's have this conversation again. When I told him that the King James Bible was the ultimate authority over every other type of biblical scripture, and he said, that's not the case, but let's have this conversation later. Instead of hitting me in a point-by-point debate about everything I could have possibly been wrong on, all he did was plant that seed of doubt and do it from within, not from without. He did that from within the foundation of my Christianity. Had he not done that, had my foundation not been taken out from under me there, I would have probably kept believing the same thing. But I don't. And in both of those cases, it's because my foundation was challenged. So in your case, Locke, my thought process would be, go for the foundation. Why do you believe what the party tells you? Is something right just because the party told you that? And then at that point, they might start changing their own mind. You can't change somebody else's mind. You can't. That is impossible. But you can plant the seeds for them to change their own mind. And the reason I say that it's impossible for you to change somebody else's mind is you can present them with the facts, or you can present them with an argument, and they have to internalize it, they have to consider it, and then they change. You didn't do that to them. This is one of the reasons why we have so many issues in the field of psychology, for instance. because a lot of the goals in psychology are to figure out the whys, the why people tick and why people do the things that they do. But because so much of this happens on an internal level, we get inconsistencies. There's some people that think that psychology is not a science. Those people are wrong, but their position is at least not unsound. Tony Designs says, Messenger Revealed told me in a side chat on another channel that he has a video coming out Friday that he guarantees you'll want to respond to. Yeah, sorry, no. Messenger Reveals is just doing that for clout at this point. That video is probably already out, and I haven't seen it. And I'll probably watch it, maybe. I don't know, we'll see. If it's something I think is worth responding to, then I'll probably respond to it, but that sounds like clout chasing to me. The due date says, the next time you bring up bodily autonomy rights in the U.S., I recommend you bring up the court case McFall versus Shrimp. Would you be willing to take this suggestion from me? So, I would be willing to, but let me see what the McFall versus Shrimp case is, because I'm actually not aware of it. Let's see if I can learn something here. Let's learn something together. McFall versus Shrimp, a 1978 case in Pennsylvania. Whoa, that's falling. The court ruled that it is unacceptable to force another person to donate body parts, even in a situation of medical necessity. Oh, this is a practical application of the violinist argument. This might actually just be a video at some point. 39-year-old unmarried asbestos worker Robert McFall suffered from a rare bone marrow disease. The patient's bone marrow fails to manufacture certain necessary blood components. Without an urgent transfusion, he would die. His first cousin, a 42-year-old crane worker, was the only available person that was a match, but he refused to donate his bone marrow, which would have dramatically increased the odds of saving his cousin's life. He sued him in order to force him to donate his bone marrow. But when it ended up in court, he stated that his position was morally indefensible, but simultaneously refused to force Shrimp to donate his bone marrow. Okay, so this is like the this is identical to the argument I've made multiple times, that I'm willing to grant who's itching why that I'm willing to grant full personhood to a fetus, and in so doing, I can accept that aborting a fetus can be considered murder. I don't think that the lawful distinction in murder is terribly important, so let's go ahead and just call it killing at that point. I'm perfectly fine and willing to accept that. And when I accept that, I can say that, yeah, no, this thing might be morally indefensible. But it is the lesser of two evils between forcing a woman to donate her body to the fetus, even for its survival. And the legal system seems to agree with me here, at least in the case of McFall versus Shrimp. So no, I think I might actually want to do a full video on that at some point. Mythical Sky Satan has a question, and that is, if someone happened to make you a custom layout for League, would you be able to use it in streams? No obligation. I'm just asking if you know how. So I do have not a custom layout for League, but I'd like, when I'm playing games, to use just one layout. So when this layout changes, it changes for everything. And the someone who would make me a custom layout in that case would be Emmett, because she is channel artist. That is her job and her distinction and her title. So that would be on her. That said, let's see. What's the next one? Marceline Belladonna says, do you know that you have a randomly oddly satisfying video in your video response section? Do I? Hold up. Let's see here. Playlists. Video responses. Looks like it's between... Oh, I do. Well, let's remove that shit. I don't know why that's sitting in there. Huh, neat. Also, if you guys are in the chat and you have any questions for me, please let me know. I'll answer chat questions as well, not just the Discord questions. So, one from Solar Ranger. Hey, so I'm hoping you're having a good day. Anyways, the question wasn't asked a million times already. Do they still allow you on WoW after your video criticizing Blizzard? Yes, I am allowed to play WoW. I am still able to play. Catalyst says, if Logic doesn't let Pelagia out of hell, can you rescue him? If Shannon asks me to rescue Paul, then sure, though I think that's probably a Shannon problem. Joel Fela says, you talked about mind uploading today. Have you ever seen Isaac Arthur on Isaac Arthur's YouTube channel? He covers the topic in great detail. Nope. Haven't seen it. Let's see here. Cinderquill says, have you ever been involved with that weird app, Candid? A guy I'm talking to about you mentioned it. Nope. I have not. Bumblebee says, have you watched JoJo? So what's your favorite Joe and Joe Bro? So I've only seen the first 8 episodes, so the first part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I am slowly working my way through it. I enjoy the style of JoJo, and I think that the characters are interesting. I like Dio, for instance. But the actual plot is really kind of boring so far. There's nothing plot-wise driving me forward, so I'm very slowly working my way through it. Very, very slowly. Sniper Shot says, does Suris have an odd sleep schedule? Yes! I have a horrible sleep schedule. Marissa says, Suris, I have found a YouTube channel called Coach Dave, who makes many of our funnies look mild. I've heard of Coach Dave. I would actually probably need to look into him. I've never heard anything good about him. But apparently every video he has is an hour long. Ooh. That's unfortunate. Nora says, not really a question, more of a suggestion. I feel like maybe not the content you produce, but rather the way you present your content is getting stale. Mostly, what I mean is that I feel like the art should be updated. Intro, character portrait, animated background. I feel like episodes are blending together at this point, and it's feeling samey. Feeling kind of burnt out as a viewer. Well, that's actually one of the reasons why I am slowly starting to change things up on my channel a little bit. Let's see. The next one, it says, from Crystal Chan, you said in your recent video that you used to write code. I'm kind of curious of how far you got into that. The reason I'm asking is because there's a sort of advanced thing known as neural networks, which allows for a synthetic evolution to create something. I think that would be a great point against anyone who says intelligent design is real, because DNA looks like a code, as this is code doing the evolution of random changes to get better at a task. And I did ask them, when they say neural networks, are they referring to genetic programming? And they said, sir, Jules says neural networks are a type of machine learning used to help computers learn pattern recognition mostly. Practical applications is like training a search engine to correctly identify an image of a dog versus a cat. Okay, then I do know what this is. This is kind of what Facebook uses for facial recognition. I have heard about this. I'm not an expert in it, but I do know of the concept at least. If that helps. And that said, that is actually the end of the questions there. Apparently, I am now all caught up on this. Apparently. Oh, no, there's actually some other ones that I haven't got into. Let's see. Next one is from Skeptical Weeb. Vosh had a video where he says he's okay with left-wing terror during a debate. What do you think about this? So, I'm not a fan of terrorism of any kind, but at the same time, I do recognize that the legal definition of terrorism... In fact, actually, let me look it up right now. Okay. The unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. I am not okay with violence and intimidation specifically, but I also recognize that the legal definition of that can be kind of loose. However, there is one thing in there that says that the use of force or violence against a person or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof, in furtherance of political or social objectives. So, it's hard to say, based on the legal definition that says the unlawful use of force and violence against a person or property to intimidate or coerce the government specifically. If the government were to send forces against a civilian population and the population were to fight back, they would be engaging in terrorism at that point. And at that point, I would support the civilian population. Probably. So that ends up making me in defense of terrorism at that point, which is weird. But at the same time, based on that definition, if the government was doing something to hurt its citizens and the citizens were to try to revolt against the government at that point, then, I mean, what are you going to do? Just say, no, the law says nuh-uh, so suffer. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take that stance. That stance sounds largely indefensible. The next one is, I've heard about the GRSM lawsuit from Arizona, where a person won to be able to refuse service on a religious basis because they're gay. What is your stance? So if you're able legitimately to give a service, and the only reason you don't give a service to somebody is because of a religious reason, specifically that religious reason says you can't give a service to somebody who's gay, for instance, I would hope that that's kind of unlawful. Because all it would take is somebody to construct and legalize a religion that says that they can't give service to somebody who's black, and all of a sudden we have segregation and Jim Crow again. So, no, they were able to win that lawsuit, but I don't think they should be able to, personally. The Pumpkin King says, I heard there's no gay gene, so it causes a person to be gay. Is it innate or a choice? Because basically I hear that scientists found no gay gene, therefore it's a choice. Please help me understand what this all means. I'm so confused now. Okay, so beliefs are not a choice, and beliefs are not influenced by genes. Attraction works the same way. However, that said, there are biological components to being gay, from what I understand, because if you have a son who's gay, the likelihood that another son that you have to be gay increases. There seems to be some correlate, which implies that there is, on the very least, some biology there. But either way, when it comes to attraction, what we've largely found is that, biology or no, attraction works a lot like belief does. And that it's not something that's voluntary. Now, unlike belief, attraction also seems to be something that we largely can't change. Whereas we know beliefs can change. We know they can. Attraction doesn't seem to do the same thing, though. We can numb somebody's response to attraction. For instance, if somebody were to look at a picture that they found exciting but they thought was morally wrong, like, say, they're gay and they're looking at a picture of a guy, and they were to get some type of punishment every time that they looked at the picture, then yeah, they can, at that point, kind of be dissuaded, where, like, they shy away from that attraction, but it's not going to remove the fact that that attraction's there. It just means that they're going to have a psychological response to feeling that attraction that's largely negative. But the attraction itself, the foundational thing, doesn't seem to actually go away. And he says, having looked into epistemologies, I've recently found out about phenomenalism and was wondering your take on it in general. Well, let me take a look at what that is. The doctrine that human knowledge is confined to or founded on the realities or appearances presented to the senses. That conflicts with my theory of knowledge. It doesn't sound incorrect, but it conflicts with my theory of knowledge. as an example, so my theory of knowledge is very simple, very basic, and that's probably because I'm a pragmatist, so delving into how you know something past the very basic form doesn't seem to be terribly useful. We seem to be able to operate outside of that. My theory of knowledge is that you know something if you believe something that's true. You can't know something and not believe it. But you can believe something without knowing it. Because as far as my theory of truth goes, you have a Venn diagram where there's belief on one side and truth on the other, and what you happen to believe that also happens to be true is directly in the middle, and that is the intersection between the two parts of the Venn diagram. And there you will find knowledge. What you believe that is true, you know. And if the doctrine that human knowledge is only confined to the realities that are presented to the senses, that is directly in contradiction to what my theory of knowledge is. Because my theory of knowledge is that if I happen to believe something and it happens to be true, then I know it. I may not know that I know it, but I know it. But if I'm believing something that wasn't informed by my senses, or the appearances presented to my senses, and that thing also happens to be true, under my theory of knowledge, that's knowledge. But under phenomenalism, that's not knowledge, because you can only know something that's been presented to your senses. So while phenomenalism sounds intuitively correct, it is directly opposed to what I know my theory of knowledge to be, or what I believe my theory of knowledge to be. Nightshade Demon says, an interesting thought. I'm bi. I have a choice. Would religious arguments be valid when applied to bisexual or pansexual people? No, because at that point, if you like somebody and that person can consent enthusiastically and with full knowledge to a relationship with you, and they were to be barred on religious grounds, then that would be a violation of your personal autonomy. Doesn't matter if you're bi and you could just date a girl instead or date a boy instead. Doesn't matter. If the person you happen to like happens to be the same sex, they're violating your autonomy to try to argue you shouldn't be able to. MUI Pikachu says, I have a question. You mentioned that you got to meet a lot of fans at the anime convention you went to and really enjoyed that experience. Would you ever consider an official fan meetup? And what would the ideal meetup be like? So I didn't meet a lot of fans. I met 3. And I did enjoy meeting them. That was cool. I liked that. But would I consider an official fan meetup if I were larger? Maybe. But not until I'm larger. Because I'm utterly terrified that I'm going to start a meetup and then nobody show up. So, yeah, as much as I would like to, I think I would have to not do that until I'm large enough to guarantee that there's at least 1 or 2 people there. Taproot says, their question is, I wanted to ask this for a while. Why don't you like tautologies? For how I've seen you used it, it's always been the trivial tautology. X has the same true value as itself, but there's more to tautologies than just the reflexive property. So, would you mind explaining? So, we're going to do a thing real quick just to make sure that I don't foot in mouth. So a tautology is the saying of the same thing twice in different words, generally considered to be a fault of style. They arrived one after the other in succession. So my problem with that is that when you state something twice in different words, that doesn't actually get you anywhere in a conversation. It seems like you... The point of a from what I understand, the point of a tautologist statement is that you are trying to have one of the 2 statements be justified. And if you're trying to justify a statement using, or justify a proposition, using something within the proposition to justify itself isn't going to work. You can argue that something's an axiom, you can argue that something's a brute fact, but arguing that something is justified by presenting it as a tautology seems like you're trying to say saying that something's self-justified. And that doesn't seem to be terribly useful in conversation. Now, maybe there's more to tautologies that I'm not aware of, but they do seem to have that problem of just being extra verbiage that's not necessary. The point of bringing the extra verbiage seems to be to justify the statement, but the extra verbiage doesn't justify the statement. It fails in its attempts. So, and again, maybe there's something I'm missing, but that seems to be what my understanding of that is. Tony Design says, how are you so feeling great on Modern Day Debate tonight? Not a real question, but I didn't want to ping you outside the channel, and you were. Modern Day Debate. What was I on Modern Day Debate at that day? This is on 9/18. What Modern Day Debate thing was I doing at that point? Let's see. We've got to go into the video section. That would have been almost 2 months ago. Let's see. Atheist Suris versus Polytheist versus Christian, I think, is the one you were talking about. And if that's the case, I was dealing with religious arguments, which is usually an area that I'm very comfortable in, if that helps. Jack and Quill says that I have new fan art. Oh, boy. I guess we have to go into the stream art section and drop this in here. So the fan art that just got dropped in is this. It is from Jack and Quill. And it looks like Rule 63 Suris is about to kill Ocean. And Ocean would like to be saved. But unfortunately, there is no saving Ocean. There is none. Ocean gets to suffer. We're going to throw this up here. Boom. It is up there. Problemo solvdo. Okay, cool. Taproot says, okay, you're looking at it from a different view than I am. Tautologies have a different function in math than language, I guess. That's why I was confused. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, that's the thing. If you're talking about in math, then yeah, that's a little different than the way that we use it in language. In language, it just seems to be an issue of redundancy. And the redundancy was used for a purpose that it actually can't serve, because you can't justify something by just saying it twice with different words. Let us see here. Saxophone says, where do you lean economically? Are you more of a social democrat or more towards socialism? More towards socialism. I'm not a social democrat. I'm closer to a democratic socialist. From the way I understand the way that the economic theory works for that, I am closer to democratic socialist, but I'm not SocDem. And Nami says, it seems to be everywhere, so I thought I'd ask, if Raid Shadow Legends wants to sponsor you, would you do what everyone else is doing too? My answer to that would be, if a company wants to help pay my bills, it's going to be very hard for me to argue against letting that company pay my bills. Because I'm poor, and having a company pay my bills sounds very appealing. Maggle says, I'm getting super confused about your polyamorous relationship. You're still dating Raziel, correct? Is she the Marine veteran you talked about in your video? I'm sorry if the question sounds too personal. I'm just super confused. The answer to that is, I am dating Raz, Emmett, and Aaron. Raz is dating me, Aaron, and Emmett. Aaron is dating me and Raz. Boom. There you go. Aaron is the vet. MEI Pikachu says, I remember you saying in a stream that you played Bendy and the Ink Machine. Did you happen to see the new game that the creators made? No, I've actually not played Bendy and the Ink Machine. I just really enjoy the music. Tony Design says, just to note, Messenger Reveals was on Knock's stream. Side chat mentioned destroying you several times. That doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me at all. Token Metalhead says, Suris, do you listen to metal? If so, what are your preferred subgenres and bands? If not, what do you listen to? I listen to a little bit of everything. Metal is something that I haven't explored a lot. I've listened to a lot of metal, but not enough to be able to identify subgenres. I am also a fan of electro swing as far as different music that I listen to. Somber says, have you read Project Horizons yet? Yes, I have read Chapter 1 of Project Horizons, and I'm going to be reading Chapter 2 when I have the time to. Hackett Elesity, I believe that's how you pronounce that, says, I'm working on assembling a YouTube channel. Since you have a YouTube and a Patreon, I value your opinion. My question is, would getting a Patreon together before actually starting the channel, meaning loading the videos, be presumptuous, or do you think it's a good idea? My response to that is very simple. I started my Patreon very early into my channel's production. If people like what you are doing, they will support you. If they don't like what you're doing, they won't. Setting up your Patreon too early, I don't think of it as presumptuous, because ultimately the other people who are watching your things are going to be the judges of whether or not what you're producing is quality. And if they think it is, they'll support you. Pikachu says, I don't remember asking the question. How long ago was that? 2 months ago, I think. Epicuri Vampiri says, would you ever consider discussing Turning Point USA? A friend of mine was out at one of their events last night to take notes, and she even audio recorded it. It was for the purpose of analyzing their arguments to pick through the bullshit. The group tends to come across as a simple student-run grassroots group, but it's the complete opposite. They seem to use some deceptive tactics and even have a professor watch list. I think they should be called out at some point. To be honest, I'm not even sure where to begin. So, on my own channel. So, are they the ones that I covered with Callan? TFP Student Action. That's not the same thing. So I could consider discussing Turning Point USA, but I don't know enough about them yet.